Ricci Northern supports upstate New York construction with over 400 employees, 250 trucks, 9 ready-mix plants, 4 blacktop plants, and 40 aggregate mines. But their most important number is your bottom line. Contact them today to see why Ricci Northern has been the choice for contractors and project managers across upstate New York since 1929.
Hi, I'm Michael Ricci, and welcome back to the FL1 Sports Podcast here on FingerLakes1.com and a special edition of my own CR Sports Podcast. Today I'm talking to another young sports broadcaster. He's a graduate of the University of North Texas in 2018. He has called collegiate football, baseball, softball, and basketball on ESPN. He has also called minor league baseball, and he's been the play-by-play announcer for the Texas Motor Speedway, as well as calling G League games for the Dallas Mavericks team, the Texas Legends. And in my mind, what trumps all of this and is my favorite thing about our special guest coming on is working for the Dallas Cowboys since 2019. He's a TV and radio host for pre- and post Dallas Cowboys coverage, and he is a host of the award-winning talk show Talking Cowboys. He's even called Cowboys preseason games and the Cowboys-Seahawks game this past year on the radio as he filled in for the legend Brad Sham. Today I'm honored to be talking to Kyle Youmans. Thanks for joining me today, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's crazy that you even say all of those things because it feels like yesterday I was at UNT. I was in the classroom and I was kind of learning the ropes of this business, and it's been a ton of fun over the last couple of years, and I'm super blessed to be with you today and get to talk through it all.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. And, just the first question I'm going to ask you is just a baseline one. Why has sports broadcasting been the job that has appealed to you since you've been a young kid?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's a passion. It's almost a part of who I am, and it's where I found the most joy in spending my time around sports. And it started at a very young age. I mean, me and my dad used to go to Baylor football games, Baylor basketball, baseball. My mom is a huge baseball and softball fan, and my dad loved racing, which is where that Texas Motor Speedway gig really kind of hit home for me. So it started as a young age. It's funny, when I was younger, I would collect the little NASCAR stock cars instead of Hot Wheels. Instead of having just the generic Hot Wheels, I wanted to have the actual NASCAR diecast toys that you could play around with. And I had like a little mat in my room that I would race them on, and I would take my dad's camcorder at the time and I'd put it on a tripod, and I would call the race without actually really knowing it. I was just playing in my room, but without knowing it, I would call the race how I would watch the races on Sunday with my dad. So it really started from an early age. And it's funny, whenever I got into high school and started looking into sports broadcasting as a career, and as I looked to maybe further my education at the collegiate level, my parents were basically like, yeah, we kind of knew that was the direction you were going to go in. We just wanted you to figure that out. And of course, once I did, I found a passion for the other sides of the business, not just the sports, not just calling games, but it's really the preparation. It's the people that you meet along the way, the production value that's in it too, all kind of stacked up one on top of the other. But it's been an absolute blast, and it's nothing I would change, or I wouldn't change any of it for the world.
And, you talk about the preparation, and this is something that I found on you that I think is very interesting, very unique, and goes into the whole preparation. Now, for Cowboys games, you do the pre and post, and I found that you make a spotting board for every single one of those games. Now, there's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to make a whole spotting board. That's, if you don't know what that is, to the people listening out there, it's for when you're calling a game and you have people and their stats written down, and you have that for everything. Now, you've done this for all pre and post games, and this went into a little bit of why you were the one that was called when Brad Sham couldn't make it for the Cowboys-Seahawks game. Just what goes into making a spotting board for every single game you do, whether you're calling the game or not?
Yeah, with the Cowboys side of things, the best way for me to describe it is, if I'm going to call a game, I'm going to be prepped to a certain level. I'm going to be ready to a certain level. So if I'm not calling a game, but I'm still covering it, and I'm doing pregame, postgame coverage, we're doing coverage throughout the week on the podcast, the best way for me to prepare for those gigs is by pretending like I'm going to call the game at some point, by prepping like I would call the game anyways. So every week, and it starts early, usually Monday or Tuesday, I put together at least a preliminary board. If I haven't called games or covered games for that certain team before, I'll have kind of it's more of a skeleton board with a depth chart, contract info, years with the team's stats, that sort of thing. And I'll have a baseline spotting board that I would use as my notes throughout the week. I'd start at Monday, kind of finish it up Tuesday or Wednesday, and then by Thursday and Friday, I'm adding to it. I'm finding notes. I'm sifting through the research and the information that we get on a weekly basis, and I'm adding it to that board. So that way, whenever pregame coverage comes around on Sunday, then I have it ready to go. If I have called the team before, so the Cowboys, this year the Seahawks, I keep a running board throughout the year. So I have their boards ready to go at any waking moment. And that just happened to be one of those moments where it did work out well for me. It's just a part of my weekly preparation, and it's something that I have found works for me, is that if I prep like I'm going to call the game, even if I'm not calling the game, I get better preparation work out of it, and I tend to recall that information better for our TV shows, our podcasts, and our pre- and post-game coverage as well.
So you're talking about the Cowboys-Seahawks game. I just want to get right into it. This is something that, was a surprise for many people, and especially yourself, that you were the one calling the game. Brad Sham, voice of the Cowboys for over 40-plus years. He's been a legend. He's called all the big moments throughout the Cowboys' history, it feels like. You hear the "you're up." I heard that quote. It said, "You're up. We need you to step in and call the game tonight," because Brad wasn't able to go for that night.
Yeah.
What goes through your mind initially when you hear that?
Yeah, well, that moment specifically, it was about an hour and a half before kickoff, and we were down in the northern end zone at AT&T Stadium, and we were in the middle of our pregame show. We had actually started our pregame show a little bit early because due to Amazon Prime being on the field and having their own pregame show, we had to clear the field 30 minutes prior than we normally would. Usually we go pretty close up to kickoff for a night game like that, or at least go up to the top of the hour. We were getting off the field quickly. So we were 2 or 3 segments into our pregame show, and we don't get commercial breaks for that show specifically. We pitch the sound bites, we pitch the packages. And so I sent it to a pre-produced piece of content, and Derek Eagleton, one of my bosses, Nick Eatman, who's my direct boss, they kind of came over and they said that quote, "You're up." Brad couldn't make it. And my first initial thought was, it was pure worry for Brad, because they said it was a medical condition and a medical episode that kept him from getting in the stadium. So that was the first thing I said. I wanted to make sure Brad's okay, because he's been a mentor to me, just from interacting with him, both in the locker room settings, game settings, training camp throughout the last couple of years. He's always been great with me, and we've talked about the play-by-play element, and he knows what my goals and my dreams are, and at some point I would love to be the next voice of the Cowboys, but there's no voice of the Cowboys like Brad Sham. He is the true legend. He's that guy, and he always will be in my eyes. And so that was my first instinct, was, is he okay? And once I did get word that he was good, my next instinct was, okay, how do I get off of this pregame show and get up to the booth? Because I have no idea who's producing, who's the engineer. Of course, I know Babe Loffenberg and Christy Scales, the color analyst and the sideline reporter, respectively, just from Cowboys coverage, and they've always been incredible as well. But I wanted to at least get in the booth and kind of get my feet settled in to my surroundings of who's going to be in my ear, who's the spotter, who's the statistician, that sort of deal, to try and kind of get my bearings straight. So we made a call to Bill Jones, who we host a bunch of stuff together. We've called the preseason games together the last couple of years, and he came down from the writer's press box and came and finished pregame live. And as soon as he was able to hop on, I kind of made the announcement like, "Hey, I'm calling the game. It's a last minute thing. Brad is okay. We'll talk about the specifics later on, but if you want to listen, here I am." Got up to the booth 45 minutes before kickoff. That was when it was. And then upon walking into the booth, I did a pregame interview with Eric Chiafalo, Brian Broaddus, and the 105.3 The Fan crew. And then they basically, about 35 minutes or so left before kickoff, I sat down, I started talking to everybody, kind of getting my bearings straight, talking to one another, and then pregame coverage was there, and we're ready to roll, and we kind of opened it up, and heck yeah, I was nervous all the way through it, but once I kind of saw Babe and his calmness, and Christy and her confidence level in me as well, I mean, that helped really settle those nerves and kind of get into the flow and able to call the game the way that I normally would.
Yeah, so once you started getting past the pregame coverage of the game on the radio and you get into the game, did you feel like you were in like a normal place where I've called a bunch of games before, I can do this, I know the Cowboys really well, and you were prepared because you made a spotting board for the Seahawks? Did you feel like that you eased into it right in the way?
Oh yeah, it took a little bit. It was, I don't know if even easing into it is the right way to say it. It was more of like a choppy start,
Right.
and I righted the ship because I mean, I've gone back and listened to it a couple times just to kind of critique myself as broadcasters do, and right off the jump, I could tell one, I hadn't talked through the coin toss and exactly what the coin toss had in store. Apparently, Brad and Babe do their own special coin toss, kind of back and forth banter that I didn't know about because I'm usually hosting pregame coverage, so I don't get the chance to listen to their pregame stuff. If anything, I get to listen about halfway through the first quarter. So that was kind of a thing I probably should have talked through. And then once I kind of got into a groove, down distance, yard line, players, formations, speed of the game, that started helping me kind of find my footing. I think about midway through the first quarter, back into the first quarter is when I finally felt comfortable. But then the second, third, fourth quarters, I mean, the back half of that game was about as good as any game that we had all year. So it ended up just being a ton of fun calling that game and getting to be really the voice of the Cowboys for a game is a dream come true. Getting to call an NFL game, just baseline, is a dream come true. And so to really experience that was unbelievable. And the game certainly paid out as well because it was an incredible one.
Yeah, it was a great game to watch on Prime. I don't like their coverage that much this year, but it's a little bit different. I wish I could listen to it on the radio instead. My other question for you is, I feel like it's pretty clear what your biggest goal and dreams are for a career and getting a job with being the voice of the Cowboys maybe in the future. Now, have you had a favorite memory calling a game outside of the Cowboys-Seahawks game, and what's your favorite sport to call in general?
Ooh, that's a good question. Favorite sport? I'll start with that one because I've got to find kind of a favorite moment. My favorite sport to call is probably basketball. It's just because it flows and it's so easy and the highlights are so much fun. It's just such a high flying sport. Some of the kind of underlying sports, I really enjoy calling lacrosse. Lacrosse has been a ton of fun. I don't know if I've ever had more fun calling anything in my life than getting to call a couple of the NASCAR races before COVID-19 hit and kind of liquidized one of the departments at Texas Motor Speedway. But getting to call those NASCAR and IndyCar races were that was a ton of fun. But yeah, I think in terms of the major sports, basketball would probably be number one. Baseball on the radio is a blast. I don't discriminate in terms of the sports. I do a little bit of everything, like you mentioned a minute ago, and that's just because I love being around it. And I one of the things I can't stand doing is sitting on my hands. And even recently, me and my wife welcomed in triplets in February, and we had our paternity leave in the middle of April. And I just sitting around on my hands and spending time with my family, as precious as those moments were, I was still waiting and antsy and ready to get back on a microphone just because I love doing it so much. And so, I think that would probably be one of those favorite memories. And then outside of the Seattle Cowboys game, I know this is probably a lame. It's not a lame story, but it's another Cowboys broadcast. I called the preseason game last year against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It was on NFL Network, and it was on CBS here in Dallas. And getting to call that game at home, it was the first time I had called an NFL game at AT&T Stadium because the only other games that I had called in the preseason were always on the road. So getting the call from the TV booth at AT&T Stadium was really cool, but that's not even the coolest part about it. The coolest part is that our stage director in the booth, who was sitting right next to me for that game, was my wife. I got to call the game with my wife next to me on a headset. And there's a picture. If you go to my Twitter at Kyle_Youmans, my cover photo is me in the middle looking out onto the field, and my wife is right next to me with Isaiah Stanback to my right. And Isaiah and I are super close. We're good friends too, and we've gotten to know each other over the last couple of years. So having like those two guys next to me, I had a buddy from high school as my spotter who's really been a great spotter for me the last couple of years. So just kind of having that booth experience and being around those people that I care about and I love so much was really, really cool. My wife had a blast. She was the one. She got to tell me what to do the whole game, and she loved it. She was like, "You got to talk about Lucas Oil, talk about AT&T, talk about this package. Here's this coming up." Like, she got to tell me everything I was doing all game long, and so she loved every element of it. And it was a great memory for sure.
What is her job? Does she have an interest in that? I did see that post a while back on your Twitter. Just wondering how that all came together.
Yeah, so she's worked in the business about as long as I have. I mean, we met at North Texas at the TV station at UNT. She was in broadcast media, sports management sort of thing, and she mostly wanted to be in the MC side of things. She wanted to be like an on-field MC, and she did so with the Frisco Rough Riders, who's the AA affiliate for the Rangers. She did that for about 10 years. She's still the on-court MC for the Texas Legends. So as I'm calling the TV broadcast, she's on the court playing games, keeping the crowd energetic and keeping them entertained. And then it's funny, she interned with the Cowboys the year before I got a job with the Cowboys. So she always makes the joke that she blazed the path for me, and I just kind of worked out and whatever. But we started dating in 2020. We just kind of had some great contact through the years. We didn't date in college. We didn't date after college, but 2020 came around, and I kind of finally got the guts to ask her out on a date, and made it happen. And since it was COVID, I mean, she ended up just kind of coming to the apartment. I made her dinner. I cooked salmon and some other lame dishes. I wasn't a great cook, nor am I even now. But yeah, so that was kind of how we got started. And she's always been around the business, and whenever that moment came and they needed a production manager or they called it I said it earlier, I almost want to say field general. That's kind of what it is, but it was a producer in the booth, and stage manager is what they called it, is what Scott Purcell here at the Cowboys called it. He came to me and was like, "Hey, I don't have anybody, but I had an idea. What about Lorena? How would she feel about doing it?" I was like, "She'd be all for that. What are you talking about?" So she had a blast with it, and it's something that I'll never forget.
And maybe your greatest accomplishment together is the triplets. So congrats on that again, and happy belated Father's Day to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so then I want to get into this too. So working with the Cowboys, you've called games, you've had host appearances with ex-Cowboys players like Barry Church. You mentioned Isaiah Stanback, Nate Newton, and even Michael Irvin this past year. What's it like calling games with those guys and just talking to them on the air?
They're awesome. I mean, it's funny because you always hear about it from people in the business that they're just another guy. They're just other people, and there's some truth to that. And they certainly act like they're just some other people, but they're way better at the athletic side of things than I ever was. I was never a really good athlete. I was never talented in that element, and it's fun because they don't ever look down upon the people around them. And I think we have such a great group of guys here. I really do. I would do anything for Isaiah and Barry and Nate, and those guys are just incredible. And I mean, we've been to birthday parties, we've been to workouts, we've been to celebrations, we've been to all sorts of things for those guys, because it's not even just a group of guys on TV. It's almost like a small knit family, and it's funny, we're going to dinner next week just before the season gets crazy and kind of catch up. And of course, I've been out of the office quite a bit because of the babies, and so can't wait for that. But I mean, it's funny because I grew up watching Nate Newton and Barry Church and Isaiah Stanback on the football field, but you never really know what kind of relationship you're going to have with people until they get in front of you. And they're all just A++ guys. And then and like you said, you mentioned some of the other guys that we've gotten the interview and gotten to talk to over the years. And I don't know if I've ever met somebody, at least within the Cowboys organization, that I dislike talking to, because when you're a part of this organization, it feels like a family. And there's a lot of course, debate outside this building, and there's a lot of controversy outside this building.
As we're experiencing some technical difficulties here inside the studio with our connection with Kyle. Hopefully everything gets back going soon. But yeah, I think that what we're talking about is a pretty cool thing, that he's had this experience with the Cowboys and being a sports broadcaster with them. Hopefully we can get everything back online in a minute. And Kyle's back here. I just held down the fort for a minute there.
Did I get dropped, or what?
Well, I'm not quite sure what happened actually, but I think I held it down for a second. It looked like we zoomed in on your face, then you went away. But back here, so sorry about that, Kyle. I think everything's all right now.
Good. Where did you hear me cut out?
You were talking about how just the guys that you've worked with and how fun it's been with the Cowboys and having those opportunities to talk to players, even like Michael Irvin as well.
Yeah, I think if you're in the building, you're a family member is really what it was. And I don't know if you heard me say that a moment ago, but there's all that controversy outside the building. There's all the debate and the talk and the football outside the building. But really, it feels like a family environment inside these walls. And it really is a lot of fun getting to know those guys and really talk about them as brothers. And we've got such a great staff. I mean, even on the writing side of things, and we've brought in some new faces recently. Nick Harris is with us on DallasCowboys.com. Patrick Nosey-Walker, Nicole Hutchison. I mean, they're all just incredible at what they do. And so I'm excited about this year. I think Cowboys fans are going to be really, really, really happy with the content that we'll create going into 2024, because I honestly think we're as talented and as hungry and driven as we've ever been in this department, and it's going to be a fun group to watch and to be around and get to produce some stuff with over the next couple years.
And so I think a question a lot of people wonder about sports broadcasting and sports broadcasters specifically is, what is like the everyday thing? Because it's so different throughout the seasons of the year. And I think probably the next stop for you for the Cowboys would be inside training camp, going to Oxnard with them. What is it like that you do every single day, and how does that change throughout the seasons? If you could just break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. It feels like it's seasons within seasons along the way, because right now we're in a downtime of the year. There's not a ton of college athletics going on. There's not a ton of pro stuff going on. I'll do some like freelance things here and there. So I've got an MLS match in a couple weeks that I'll call. And then after that, the next thing I've got is wheels up to Oxnard. And normally I would be on the team charter out to Oxnard, but with 3 newborn triplets at home, I'm not going to go the whole time. I'm only going to go for like the meat of training camp. So I'll go August 2nd through the 12th and kind of get as much as I can within a shorter period of time. But once we get back from training camp is just eat, sleep, breathe football, by the way. I mean, you're literally staying in a hotel, same hotel as the players are. You walk out, you get breakfast, you go straight to the field, and you're basically out there either writing, shooting, producing content up until about 5 or 6 in the afternoon. And then you go eat dinner, and then you go hang out after that. So it's really eat, sleep, breathe football at training camp. Once you get into the season, it's a little bit different. Usually Monday and Tuesday is reactionary after the Cowboys play on Sunday. You take and you hear from coaches in press conferences and open locker room and things like that. Usually Wednesday, you turn the page a little bit. You start looking at the week ahead, whatever matchups coming up there. And you're watching film probably Tuesday, Wednesday to kind of get a good idea of what the production is going to look like going into the week. And then shooting TV shows, shooting podcasts Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday. Usually about Friday afternoon, we kind of take a day off, take a little bit off. You go home early. Saturday's off. Usually I'll do some college football or at least take in some college football. If I'm not calling it, I'll get to go to the North Texas games with my wife and hopefully the babies this year. Get to go to Baylor down in Waco or TCU or SMU, just whatever's around. And then Sunday, of course, you get up to the stadium, get up to the Star, wherever we're shooting our pregame show early. Usually I try and go 4 or 5 hours early because I like to reiterate my notes, try and put some extra notes, pin to paper. And then at that point, that's when you get to hang out with the guys. You get to kind of chop it up with Barry, Isaiah, Nate, produce that pregame show. And then you get to watch the game, take notes. I write my highlight packages as I'm watching the game. I usually live tweet the games too, and then from there you're going to the post game coverage. So it changes. That's a football week in its own right. But then you get into let's say early January, February. You're doing college basketball. You're finishing up football. It's that crossover season that people talk about because that's part of the busiest parts of the calendar. And then once football comes to an end, it's squarely basketball up until March, and then softball and baseball starts. And usually if I'm not shooting anything, I'm at my desk, I'm taking notes, or I'm prepping for a broadcast, or I'm interviewing and we're producing documentaries or producing content, we're writing rundowns. So that's probably a long drawn out answer to your super simple, what does your everyday day look like question, but that's really what every day is. It's a little bit different depending on what time of year.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I asked. It's because it just changes so frequently, especially in this industry. Now, I want to know how you originally got hired by the Cowboys, and how did that whole thing work out for you back in 2019?
Oh man, I love this story because it's just the right place, right time, and that's what a lot of sports positions are. Is when preparation meets opportunity. And I'd always been really confident in my on-air stuff. I had just finished up a season with the West Virginia Power as their broadcast media assistant. I was the number 2 behind David Kahn there, who I learned so much from. And I had just finished up, and I was on my way back from Charleston, West Virginia. And I'd kind of been talking with a producer with the Cowboys about a possible opening on the production side of things, not on air, but behind the scenes, running cameras, editing video, producing shows, things like that. It kind of like what I said at the beginning of this call of I enjoy the background stuff and have passion in the background stuff more so even than I do the on-air stuff sometimes. And that was a part of it of, hey, I loved my time in minor league baseball, was looking to get back into minor league baseball the next year as a number 1 somewhere. And I was going to interview for some jobs in December, but until then I needed a way to make some money, and I needed a way to make a living. And I had made this connection through covering high school football in Dallas. Of course, you know how it goes. Texas high school football, it's heralded as the best high school football in the country. I'll put it up against anybody's, especially from a talent, a depth, and a coverage standpoint. There's nothing like Texas high school football. So I had done some football stuff there, made some connections with a couple of the guys in the building, and we're talking about it. I was on my way through Tennessee, and I got a call, and they said, "Hey, production job's yours if you want it, but you got to interview tomorrow." And I was like, "Dude, I'm literally in Nashville. Like, I'm halfway through Tennessee. I gotta hustle." And they're like, "Yeah, just come by. Don't worry about it. Whatever you can get here, get here." Got here. I interviewed for the job. They offered it to me, and my first day was week 1 of the 2019 season when they played the Giants. So showed up. I didn't even know what I was doing. Showed up to the pregame and postgame show that I host now, and I think I ran audio a little bit. I ran a camera for a little bit. I helped with the ticker at the bottom, the graphic at the bottom of the screen. I did all those different things, and then they started putting me on some other stuff. They started letting me produce some of the podcasts, and they helped me. They had me edit videos, and then I would record voiceovers for the opens of the pregame show and things like that, up until we got into the off season and things like that. I was happy doing what I was doing, and then I was looking into getting the baseball job just as the plan was. Well, right at the beginning of the draft coverage, we had a couple people leave, and there was an opening on the Draft Show podcast. And I'd always covered the draft just before my time in minor league baseball. I'd always loved the draft, just being a college football fan. And so I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, like, I'd love an opportunity to host this. I've done some stuff on air over the last couple of years. I know I haven't done it for the Cowboys yet, but here's my demo. Here's all this. Right place, right time. And I was prepared for that moment because I had all my demos taken care of. I had all my resume cleared up. I had all the on-air ability just to send them a link and go whenever the time came up. And it was a tight window to hit it. And I ended up hitting it, and they gave me 3 shows. They said, you got 3 shows to try out for. And I said, sounds good. Let's do it. Ended up doing the 3 shows, went back to him, had a meeting with Derek Eagleton, who I mentioned earlier. And he said, hey, we really like what you got. Can you host this podcast too? I said, yeah, sure. So then he put me on Talking Cowboys, on the Talking Cowboys podcast, and I'm still on to this day. And so I posted those 2 shows for a little bit, and then boom, COVID hit. COVID hit right at the beginning of that. And there was a TV host here. Her name was Lindsay Draper, phenomenal host, very, very good. And she was a great friend during her time here, just teaching me some of the on-air stuff. Well, she moved back to Tulsa with her family. And when she left, her last show was our first virtual show for COVID. And so whenever she left, they said, hey, Kyle, like we need you to step into this role. Go for it. Here it is. Like you're going to host these TV shows. So I hosted the Blitz in the off season, got around to the season. We were still socially distant, but we did pregame coverage, post-game coverage, and then started really ramping up from there, getting into training camp the next year. They offered me full-time in 2021, and then the position full-time in 2021. And then ever since then, it's been about getting better and building every year. And that's been my goal here. And so crazy that it all turned out the way that it did. And it ended up being right place, right time. There was a moment in there that I did have some offers on the table to go and be a number 1 in minor league baseball, which is what I wanted to do. And instead of taking those jobs and taking those offers, which I would have done in a heartbeat initially, I was just a couple weeks into that draft show gig, and I said, you know what, let me just see how this works out, see where this goes, and then we can maybe figure it out from there. And sure enough, it ended up being the right decision. And like I said, I'm blessed to be here. I'm blessed to be here talking with you, and it's been an incredible run.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, just where I think we might see you in the future because of all this that has happened and just being in the right place at the right time, like you've mentioned. And Kyle, I couldn't be a good Cowboys fan without mentioning or asking a question about what's going on right now in the offseason. It's been another disappointing year. I cried myself to sleep after another playoff loss and not making the NFC Championship game and just losing the first round this year is just I've never seen the Cowboys go to the NFC Championship game once in my lifetime. I've never even seen it. I'm 18 years old. Neither of you. It's just sad. And I don't know what's happening. We're not spending money. We're not doing this. Can you just give me some guidance what's going on at the Star? Maybe if there's anything hopeful for me to have a little bit of light at the end of this dark, dark tunnel that seems to be being a Cowboys fan in the 21st century.
It's been a disappointing offseason, and I mean that's apparent. You look at this roster, and I think that the discouraging thing is you look at it and you say there's no way this team is better than it was last year on paper.
Right.
Now, of course, you don't play the games on paper, and if you did, that'd be great because you would have been in the NFC Championship game last year if it was played on paper. But you just didn't get better. You lost some guys to free agency. But the good thing is about it, you still have your core nucleus of talent that you had a year ago, right? You still have Dak, you still have CD, even though they're both in contract situations currently. They're still on the roster and they still belong to the Cowboys. Then you've got Trayvon, you've got Micah, you've got Deron Bland, you've got a great kicker-punter duo, a great return man. You've got some depth at certain positions, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And now you've got a young offensive line that you're excited about. So there are things that you can be excited about going into 2024. But I think what you're saying is the expectation of Cowboys fans is to get to a championship game, get to a Super Bowl, win a Super Bowl again would be phenomenal. And that's always the goal when you're a part of this organization. You are not here to be mediocre as a part of the Dallas Cowboys. But when you have a mediocre offseason like this, it seems like that's okay, right? I think they're in a bit of a crossroads. And it has to do with the cap situation, and it has to do with the amount of homegrown talent that they've accumulated over the last couple of drafts. And when you are a homegrown draft and develop team, you will, and if you have success in that area, you will have times like this where you have to pay guys like CeeDee, Trayvon, Micah, Duran, all in a row, and then you've got to re-up guys like Dak. You got to re-up guys like I'm trying to think of even anybody else along the way. That DeMarcus Lawrence, whenever that contract was back in the day, and he was tagged twice. I mean, it happens when you draft and develop as well as this team does. But I think the 2024 season is even more so a crossroads because you haven't had the playoff success to build off of. So you do have a team that, at least on paper, should be good enough to have playoff success. But when they haven't, something is up. Something may not be right. And this year is going to be a good telltale sign of that. And honestly, I mean, just from my opinion, I haven't been told this by anybody. To me, it looks like they're going into this year with that as their mindset of, okay, this team's good. Let's see how good they are. And then once we get to the end of the road, if, let's say, you don't have playoff success or you don't win the division or you don't make the playoffs in general, then at this point it's time to really shake things up.
Yeah.
So this might be the final year of that quote-unquote window before you really go into a deep rebuild. I don't think this is a rebuild, and some people have called it a quiet rebuild. I don't think that's the case. If this team is good enough to contend, they will make the moves necessary for it to contend now. But I think they want to see what that looks like beforehand. And it may not even take into the season to really get a good look at how this team looks. It may even just be training camp. They may get a good feel of how this team looks in training camp and then make decisions based off of that.
Which is another reason why everyone should watch Inside Training Camp live when you're there in Oxnard. It should be fun to watch. It should be fun to cover. I think really this year is going to be, what can you do for us, Dak? And, you know, he's been an unbelievable player in the regular season. He's had even really great games in the postseason against the Packers his rookie year, against the Bucs. He's been a good playoff quarterback at certain times, but I just think that it hasn't been the consistency in the postseason that maybe the Cowboys front office is looking to see this upcoming year, and this is a show us what you can do. But, yeah, Kyle, I think you hit it right on the head. It's going to be very interesting to watch, and maybe even early in training camp we're going to get a good feel for the whole season and how it's going to shape out.
Yeah, it's going to be weird. It really is, especially if there's no Dak in 2025 at the star around this team. It's going to be a weird look at it. But I think there's a confidence level in him. It's just, like you said, postseason success. He was number 2 in MVP voting. He's had regular season success. The one thing I will say about Dak is every time he's been healthy in an offseason, the following year has been better. It's been better, and he's built upon. He's healthy this offseason. He's been healthy all the way through. I've always liked Dak Prescott. I think he's a good quarterback. I think he's a good enough quarterback to win a Super Bowl. I think this year is going to be the telltale sign of it, though, because he's healthy again, and he's got a chance to elevate his game even further. And if he's able to do that, I think this team really goes as far as Dak Prescott's going to take him.
Well, I really hope he does, because he's a great person, a great leader for this team too. And I couldn't ask for a better person to lead the team. Just I need the playoff consistency and the playoff success. But it'll be fun to watch. And I just thank you so much for coming on today. This was such a great opportunity and pleasure. We finally got together to do this interview. Yeah. And thank you so much. If there's any advice that you could give to possible aspiring sports broadcasters out there to close this up, or just to myself even, what is it?
Well, it's to stay confident in what you do. Find your niche and do it the best that anybody has done it, whether that's preparation, that's the actual calling of the game, that's the way you treat people, the production value that you bring. Do that better than anybody and keep that confidence level and consistency all the way through. And my favorite thing too is never say no to an opportunity, because you never know where it's going to lead. I didn't say no to a high school football broadcast, and that helped lead me to calling NFL games and calling major college football games. And it's crazy how this all turns out. And I keep that confidence level, never say no to anything, and treat people as you want to be treated. Those are all things that I try and live by each and every day.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It was a great opportunity and a pleasure talking to you today. And for everybody listening,
appreciate you.
Thank you. And for everyone listening back at home, just Thanks for watching another episode of the FL1 Sports Podcast here on FingerLakes1.com. For all of our latest headlines and local content on the FingerLakes1.com local network, visit our homepage, download our free Android and iPhone app, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and look us up wherever you listen to your podcast online. And on behalf of myself, and I'd like to thank producer Paul for helping me out today in the studio, Jim Sinacropi, the whole Finger Lakes One team for allowing me to come into here today and produce this episode with Kyle. And yeah, just remember to go follow the CR Sports Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. That's where I post a lot of my stuff that you can see. We call high school games. We do podcasts weekly. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for watching today. And Kyle, thanks for coming on. I'm Michael Ricci saying so long, everybody.